you've been watching us for a while, then you might remember our Bentley Turbo R. Everyone seemed to like that. It went quite well. So we thought we'd take a second bite at the Bentley cherry, if you will. Or in fact, this is actually our third go at Bentley ownership, which I'll explain in a minute. So we thought we'd go for a Continental this time. A bit more modern, a bit more of a challenge perhaps. Is it a GT? Perhaps not. Come with me, some 5 meters with me this way, and you'll find that what we've got is a Continental, but not a GT. It's a Flying Spur, which is basically the 4-door version of the GT. A little bit longer, but mechanically it's identical. And there's good reason for that, and it explains why you've got to be really careful when you buy these cars. The first car we acquired was a GT, and outwardly it looked absolutely fine. Nice looking car, bit miley, Mulliner spec with the big wheels and everything. But once it was delivered, we found some terrible problems with it. Overheating, couldn't be cured, specialists looked at it, terrible problems. So we ended up just giving up on that one and agreed an exchange for this Flying Spur. And there's a little secret that we've discovered, which is that the 4-door, the Flying Spur, just seems to have been looked after so much better. A lot of the GTs, particularly at the cheaper end of the market, and that's where we were buying, they've had a hard life, I think. They've been maintained by people who aren't really up to it, maybe trying to do DIY when they don't really have the knowledge, or they've just been run by people who don't want to spend the money that it takes, and these aren't cheap cars to own. But if you're going to buy one and you want a little bit of a safety net, I'd say go for the 4-door. It just seems that they've been owned by people who take a little bit more care of them. They don't try and modify them. They probably drive them a little bit more gently. They probably put them in a garage. They've been serviced on the nail a little bit more often. And I think, you know, if you're a little bit wary, but you still really want that Continental, go for the Flying Spur. And also it's got a lot more room in it. It's quite an imposing car. So what have we got ourselves? What we've got is a Flying Spur, as I said, 2008 model. And if you know enough about these cars, which we're slowly starting to, then you realise that post-2006 model is a little bit easier to own. It's quite miley. It's done 143,000 odd, but a lot of its life it was a chauffeur car, a VIP chauffeur car, so it's obviously been looked after, and I think certainly they've kept it looking tidy. The bodywork's nice, it polishes up really nicely, and there's apart from a couple of tiny little pin dents on the other side and you know, a few stone chips, it's really pretty good. It's the Mulliner driving spec, so we've got the 20-inch alloys and different interior features, and it just looks a little bit more exciting. It's all entirely standard, which is a good thing, I think, apart from the tints at the back here, which I think were an aftermarket addition. We got the spec printout, the build sheet from Bentley Motors, and it didn't actually have tinted rear windows like that when it left Crewe. What about the rest of it? So this is what it's all about when you buy a Continental, whether it's a GT or a Flying Spur. The W12 engine is essentially 2 VR6 engines. I mean, it's all VW Group technology, as we know. We've got a 6-litre engine, twin turbos, 12 cylinders. It's 552 horsepower and a mighty 650 newton meters of torque, and it does push you down the road pretty well. But of course, it has to be such a massive engine because the thing weighs 2.5 tons. But despite that weight, you know, it's still enough shove to make this feel like a properly fast car. It's quite noisy as well. It's got a definite sort of VR6 noise to it. It does sound like 2 Golfs are following you, you know. Everything seems fine under here. It's all dry. Nothing looks funny out of place. Nothing's broken. Nothing smells funny. No oil leaks that I can see. Do you think we'll get lucky here? Let's hope so, because this is where the money gets spent, under here. And they've sort of shrunk the whole car over the engine. It's a massive engine and gearbox assembly. And everything you do, bar sort of basics like topping up the washer fluid, involves you removing big chunks of the car's bodywork. Like, I think the nose cone has to come off to change a headlight bulb, and the wing has to come off to change some stuff. So let's hope this doesn't need too much attention. I mentioned the sole problem with the body of the car really is the electric boot not working properly. If you press the release, you can hear some whirring. It's not lifting, is it? It releases, but it doesn't lift. So you have to lift it by hand. That's fine, I can manage that. I've been managing to do that for years now. But it's all not quite right. It doesn't sit properly at this hinge, which looks to have been messed with somehow. There's a gasket here which shouldn't even be poking out like it is. And the only way to shut it without the warning light staying on is to press the boot close button so it knows the boot's being shut, and then slowly close it, and then just push down on it until yeah, it's shut now. You can hear the latch work. As I say, it's not lined up quite properly here, so I think we might need to either fiddle with the bolts, or maybe it's just not quite right in total and it needs new parts, but it's not the end of the world, is it? So what's it like inside? Well, it's pretty much the same as the outside, really. You know, good, honest condition, and really in quite nice nick. There's a little bit of wear here, where the driver's obviously just sat here with his finger on the wheel for 143,000 miles. There's no damage or marks anywhere else, though. The seats are really quite clean. I can't really fault it. I've got some of the Magnolia leather dye to just touch in this bit with an air gun. I can't really find much else wrong with it. It's a funny mixture of technology, this car, because well, it's sort of 2003 technology, I guess, even though this is a 2008 car. So you've got funny anomalies, like you've got Bluetooth for your hands-free phone calls, but you've got no Bluetooth for music streaming. You haven't even got a jack plug you could plug anything into. I mean, you could get an aux input in a Golf in 2008, so it seems a bit odd. Anyway, you know, you can get an upgrade for that if you're prepared to spend the money. In terms of this car, well, we've got the 6-speed ZF box. It's a torque converter automatic. The DSG didn't come in until much later with the Bentley, till the 3rd generation of Continental. And we've got flappy paddles for the shift, but they're a bit odd because they stay fixed when the steering wheel's turned, so when you actually want them, they're not there. And when you do press them, it takes a second or so for the gear to engage, so it's pretty much useless really, but it also means you miss the indicators because it's sort of too low down and your finger misses them. But everything works. It's nice and comfortable. We've got the Mulliner spec leather, like I said, which gives you this sort of diamond pattern on the seats, which I think it makes it look a little bit more modern, certainly less dated than the flat leather you get in the regular model. We've got a sunroof as well, which is a really nice touch. You don't get sunroofs anymore, do you? And you've got an electric cover that comes over and a one-touch control that just opens it for you. It's a nice place to be. It's a nice place to sit for a long journey. But the very best thing about the interior of the car, in fact, the very best thing about the whole car, is the electric massage seats. They still work, and we've got them in the front and in the back. What about that? So it looks all right. It smells all right. It certainly seems all right. So how does it drive? Let's find out, shall we? It's an odd car, the Flying Spur, really. I think it doesn't quite know what it wants to be. It doesn't quite know whether it's a sports saloon or a sort of limo kind of cruising sort of car. On the one hand, you can bimble along at 30 miles an hour and it's just a refined big car, big luxury car. But on the other hand, you put your foot into it and it just takes off. I mean, it really pushes you back in the seat. It's quite noisy, actually, though. Even at idle, the engine sounds kind of busy, and you can't get away from the fact that, you know, this is a car with a sort of, you know, sporting sort of intention. I guess that's where the Bentley sort of heritage shines through, and it's probably a deliberate thing on the part of the designers. I think to probably describe it accurately, you could say it was a big limousine with a sort of slightly crazy side to its personality, really. I think that sort of sums it up. There aren't many cars this size with this sort of shove, and it really does remind you of the old Bentley Turbo R. 2.5 ton limo that can really pick up its skirts when it wants to. I mean, you can hear it now. It really takes off. Don't know what that rattle is, never mind. There's 4-wheel drive, of course, like all the Continentals, and that's quite handy, I guess, you know, if you've got to pull out of a junction really hard. You notice it just grips and goes where a front drive car would spin its wheels. But it gives it a funny sort of slightly ponderous feel, actually. I'm coming up to a bend here and I just feel that I need to slow down because I've driven this car long enough to know how it feels. It feels like the sort of 80s and 90s Audis with the Quattro 4-wheel drive. It just feels a little bit nose heavy initially. I think the air suspension works quite well at high speeds, but at lower speeds, especially on a broken surface, it's got that thumpy ride you often get with air suspended cars. I'm not a great fan of it, and of course with the 20-inch wheels it means it doesn't quite have the refinement you might expect. But on the other hand, it's got more of a sort of sporting demeanour to it. But the air suspension all seems to work fine. I've done the height control a couple of times when we've had to go into rough car parks here for filming, and it's gone up and down quite happily without any error messages coming up. It doesn't seem to sag overnight when you leave it parked outside, so yeah, been pretty impressed with it so far. There doesn't seem to be a lot wrong with it, and as you can probably hear, it certainly goes well enough still. Obviously still got both turbos blowing at full pelt, all 12 cylinders doing their thing. Certainly feels like we got all 550 horsepower still. It does feel surprisingly tight, this, for a car with the mileage. It's got 143,000 showing, and it doesn't feel sort of saggy like so many high mileage cars do, especially when they've been used for sort of chauffeuring, you know, a lot of slow speed city driving, I guess. But of course you've got to remember, really it's a German car. You do any work on these cars and you'll find VW and Audi part numbers behind the scenes and, you know, German lettering on stuff, and It's good and bad, you know, they put them together properly in crew, but it is a German car at the end of the day, with all the good that that implies, I have to say. It does feel like a high mileage Audi or something, you know, it's worn the years and the miles pretty well. Yeah, I think if I had to find fault with the Continental, it's the gearbox really. There's nothing wrong with it at all on this one. Given the mileage, it certainly seems to work perfectly well. It's nice and smooth, changes properly, and you know, no problems with it. It's just that it's relatively old-fashioned by today's standards. It's a 6-speed torque converter automatic, and even with these flappy paddles, it's just not that quick. It doesn't have the snappy change of something like a DSG box. You press these steering wheel paddles, and you just wait a second for it to change down, and you know, there's not much point really. Bentley did get a DSG box, but not until the 3rd generation of the Continental. But I've driven those, and they are quite different. Jaguar, of course, managed to use the torque converter, the later version of the torque converter automatic, with what ZF called their quick shift technology, and that does actually feel quite different. But this one's just a regular automatic, so you know, nothing wrong with it. It's about what you'd expect really for a car of this age, but it gives the car more of a lazy sort of feel. It really is an amazingly capable car for its size and weight. Of course, the downside of that is the sort of 10 miles to the gallon it's showing us right now, but what are you going to do? 6 litres. I always think you find out more about a car from just driving it gently than you do flat out, and certainly a used car like this with a few miles on it. Just cruising down this road here at 40 miles an hour, you can't hear any clonking, the gearbox isn't sort of shunting and jolting, and everything seems to work like it should. I'm cautiously optimistic here, you know, it does seem to be all pretty much up to scratch. So it looks alright, drives alright. Is it alright? Well, it seems alright, doesn't it? But we'll find out for certain in our next video, when we're going to take it to someone who really knows their stuff on Bentleys. They'll put it up on the lift, they'll get it in the workshop, and they'll tell us what's really wrong with it, or not. If you want to find out what happens when we take it to the experts, then subscribe and you won't miss the next video where we take it for the once over in the workshop.